Well, if the Chinese, or pick a country, really doesn't matter, sees that, gee, the United States or Mexico or Canada or Venezuela or whatever has no way to defend themselves, and obviously China puts a lot of emphasis on their military. If they're still strong in that and we can't fix machinery, they can come right in and either take the land or buy it, or say, hey, we'll give you the parts, or we'll give you a tractor so you can work your fields, but we want half the food. That's what's going to end up happening. They can literally, I don't want to say threaten, but squeeze us to a point where we have to support them, because if the only manufacturing going on is going on over there and they've got control over all the parts, like you talked about, they hold us hostage at that point.
And good afternoon, everyone. Things are becoming so timely with the information flowing at lightning speed. The changes are so vast that things that normally would have taken 6 months or a year are happening within a week. It's even difficult to keep up with what's happening, how fast new laws, new everything is moving. From the food shortages, one day there's enough, next day it's in complete shortage and run out of a country. So the way it's moving, you're always playing catch up right now with the information flow. So as we move, we're going to move back to a pioneering lifestyle where you're going to be required to take responsibility for yourselves, your security, fire, so many things. So I'm here with Ken today, Pinball Preparedness. You can find his feed right over at prepper.com, Pinball Preparedness. Now, we live in the same neck of the woods, if you will, and we have the same mindset. And you see behind me, if I'm using this as a prop here because I have that much that I need to overflow it as a prop set here, if you're not already like this, you're going to have to quickly speed up. You have days to weeks left before the lockup in the economy, the devaluation of the dollar, and the inbound that we can see broadcast across the way. Now, the people that pretend they're running things are now saying that there'll be nothing for Christmas, stock up now. There's going to be shortages everywhere. So where does that leave you and I? Hopefully we can get some good information today. So Ken, thank you for joining me, because I'm really interested. I see a bunch of your videos on YouTube too. And it's the time that we really take action, compare information, and maybe there'll be an idea or two that somebody that hasn't heard or listened to us before will come out and say, hey, thanks for bringing that. I didn't think about that, but it could save their life.
Thanks, David. Appreciate you having me here together with you and everything like that. So watch your stuff all the time, DAP 2030, for all the folks on my channel that aren't familiar with who David is. David is one of the preeminent people in the prepper community. For those of you that know about podcast that I do with Tradcat Night, David is also one of the contributors over there with Eric. So, got something like that in common besides having Tennessee in common, but definitely two of us have a similar mindset, wanted to get our thoughts together because, nobody's cornered the market on good ideas, and, something that he's got as an idea, maybe something that I haven't thought of, and we wanted to get together to share those ideas for each other. Of course, you all know I'm in YouTube jail on Pinball Preparedness right now, so I am working on the backup channel of Pinball Prepping. So like most of us, we have backups just in case this happens, so we can keep getting the word out to you guys. But again, thank you, David, for getting us together, and let's talk about some important stuff.
Timelines. So the world is waking up to what's happening now with the shortages occurring everywhere. And Ken, in one of your last videos, I saw you saying that the normies were waking up. So what that means is, before, people like Ken and myself, we saw these cycles repeating and we knew these things were trickling in. And now it's more of a tidal wave where you can see it from the beach rolling in. And it's going to be everybody out at the stores buying and preparing. So, I mean, what's a timeline before you think the general masses, the general public wakes up and sees there's a problem and they go, oh, I didn't prepare. And they're going to run off and buy, carts and carts and carts of things all at the same time, increasing the shortages where there's going to be no replenishment of the stores because it's going to be bought out so quickly. So what kind of timeline are you looking at for the Normie Awakening until there's lines waiting to get into the supermarkets because everybody's panic buying?
I think we're already there. And I think this started over the weekend because all of a sudden, I mean, to use the term normies, where are normies getting their information from? ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, whatever it would be. Okay. All of a sudden, starting last Friday, the mainstream media has started to come out and say, gee, there's shortages. And in what I've seen at the stores, in what people that follow my channel have reported to me seeing at the stores, is there's a lot of people that are all of a sudden panic buying and going in and buying camping gear, buying flats of vegetables, canned goods, whatever, and ransacking stores. I did a video where I went out to 3 different stores here by me on Sunday, and the places looked like it was, the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. I think there's a lot of people are starting to wake up already. And then from other information that I've heard from people in the stores is there's nothing else to backfill all this stuff. So the problem that they have, and this is, for those of us that have been long-term preppers, like anything else, they're buying at the top of the market. They're buying when the can of corn is now $1.25. They weren't buying when the can of corn was 50 cents like we all were. So they're getting whacked for the high costs, and that's just, then shortages, supply and demand is just going to drive costs even higher. So thank God that, those who have been doing this for a while aren't choking on the cost of, food, not only to eat now, but to put back in their preps.
And another thing about the preps, we've gone through more than a handful of things that were terrible after we bought it. We tried it. We're like, never going to buy that again. Like buckwheat, tortellini noodles, and say, oh, just a lot of things that you think might be good when you buy it in a 3-pack or something. You're going to need to test everything, see how salty it is, go through a pre-rinse on a lot of things coming out of a can to remove some of the sodium.
Yep.
See if it's it to your palate, and do you even know how to cook it? Yeah, it's great that you could have cans of this, tins of that, cases of this, but if you don't know how to prepare anything and you don't have backups for wood burning to be able to cook something outside in a controlled environment, even when it's raining, your power shuts off, your gas shuts off. Okay, you got wood, you can cook, but are you going to cook in an open fire? I would hope that you have some protection around it. There's so many things going so many levels deep just beyond having the food. Right.
And then you bring up the cooking issue. A lot of us have kind of tunnel vision as to our particular situation. You in somewhat of similar situation than I am, in more of that rural area where you've got some land. But you think about those people that live in an apartment. They don't have a backyard to go outside and start a fire. So how are they going to cook inside? And they need to think about something. So this is when, maybe sterno comes into play. People need to, prepping is not a one size fits all. Everybody needs to think about their own particular situation and prep accordingly there. I mean, you probably see the same thing I do a lot when people say, what should I do about this? And you need that. You need a bigger scope in what their situation is, because you can't just answer a question with a blanket answer.
Yeah, it's like scuba diving. How long will a tank of air last?
Right.
Right. Same thing. Literally the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, speaking of tanks, LNG tanks, or whatever kind of propane tank you might have, who's thinking about the adapters to take that from a 20-pound tank down into your 1-pound tank and then be able to put that into a cook stove where you actually cook in your house? Or having an adapter that would take that 20-pound and reroute it through the 1-pound so it would still fit on like a Coleman cook stove that usually has an attachment for a 1-pound bottle, but have an adapter so you could put a 20 on there so you could run it for a much longer time. Now, there's so many, and those things are only a few dollars right now. And to think about that, to be able to refill your own 1-pound cylinders with something that costs $4 on a little attachment that you screw on and turn your tank upside down. Please remember that the gas is not going to go, and you got to turn your tank upside down and let that liquid run into your 1-pound. I mean, these are little things that people, I just have from experience of learning that, oh, I need that part. So
Right.
how much you practice in the preps too? I mean, can you start a fire with a magnifying glass? Can you start a fire with a broken bottle? I mean, really, when you get down to it, your lighters have run out. Can you start a fire just in general without having a lighter and like Zippo fluid?
I mean, do you know how to use a ferro rod? Do you know how to use a bow drill? You know, anything like that. I mean, simple stuff. You say it, I say it. So many. Prepping is not buying a bunch of gear and going, oh, I'm good. Do you know how to use it? And I mean, it kills me when I see uh, people go, well, I've got all, and it's still in the original packaging. It's like, you have no clue how to use it. Use the stuff and make sure that you know what you're doing. Because, you know, one of the big things I tell people all the time about gardening, you don't just put a seed in the ground and poof, you get food. You know, you have to learn. You're going to make a ton of mistakes. And now is the time to make those mistakes while you're learning something. SHTF is not the time to go, gee, I've got all these seeds. Let me go start a garden. Oh, crap. All my soil is clay. Why won't anything grow? You know, and it's the same with anything. With, like you said, you know, do you know how to make a fire? Go out and practice. You can do it now when, you know, there's no worry about getting shot at. You don't want to be trying to practice making a fire when all of a sudden there's marauders running all over the place going, oh, look, somebody's out there trying to make a fire. Let's go see what we can get from them.
Ouch. That's not a very good morning to wake up to now, is it?
I have a habit of slapping people upside the head with reality.
Yeah. And, you know, the political unrest that's going to accompany this. So for those of you who are just watching for the first time, I follow the solar cycles on 400-year cycles or further back in the once in a 2,000-year cycle that has upset routinely civilization. There's civilization apexes and then declines. And you wonder what triggers the apex. And then off of that, if they have the highest technology, mathematics, art, engineering, et cetera, for that time period, and they suddenly collapse. And you have to ask yourself why, because it's been going on for the last at least 8,000 years prior, where they have recorded, stories and actual good information about societies that were at an apex, pottery making. There's a million things, but they collapsed. So what was the collapse trigger? And that's really what set me off on my first study there. And it's the change of the growing and the harvesting season based on the cycles of the sun that cool the planet for a very short period of time, 10, 15 years. But when you're looking over 400 to 500 years of time, a little 10-year blip is nothing. But if it does collapse a society, you can start to see the pattern. And when you see the pattern, you start to get three things that happen every one of these events. It's grand solar minimum: population decline, civil unrest, government overthrow, and then also population migration. So you can already anticipate at least three of these. So you kind of get a little threat assessment. Okay, what's happening? You can already look out a little bit into the crystal ball and know that, look for glimpses in the news of these three things happening. Population migration, well, that's pretty much been stopped. You know, you're kind of locked in place. Countries are completely locked down. Nobody's going to be migrating to Indonesia from, let's say, Canada at the moment, where that would have been a great choice. Can't grow food, too cold, hyperinflation. Hey, head to Indo, cheap, equatorial, abundant food year round. But see, the powers that knew this same cycle was coming back had locked the planet down. So now we got one checked off. So now we're looking at the economic implosion. We got cryptocurrency rising. And then you're talking about October 15th. And I keep hearing this October 15th again and again and again. So I'm just wondering, kind of out in your scope of things, what are you seeing for this October 15th or at the end of October? It seems to be an enormous amount pinpointing to this date of economic something.
The only thing that I can look at in something like that is the markets, okay? The stock market, the bond market, whatever would be. And it's not like we have futures expiring or anything on the 15th. I can't for the life of me figure out why anybody's picked this day other than it sounds good. It's the middle of the month, whatever would be. It's a Friday. You know, bad news comes out on Fridays. I'll believe it when I see it, but I I cannot for the life of me find anything that's concrete that says, oh yeah, this is the day we've got to watch out for it, because there's actual reasons. This one just to me looks like somebody pulled a date out of the thin air and says, oh, this is the day the economy is going to collapse. Now, historically, September and October suck for the markets. We've seen what's gone on. September was lousy. October has not been good. The market's kind of bouncing all over the place. But there's no strength, and you have a lot of analysts calling for demise of economies. Citibank said yesterday that China's going to see 30% inflation. You start looking at things like economic problems, and that's just going to exacerbate on bigger problems. You know, the Chinese economy collapses. What do most companies or countries do when the economies collapse? They go to war. I mean, think of the Weimar Republic in Germany back in the 20s. Okay, we went up in World War II because how'd they get out? Same thing again. It's civil unrest. It's war. It causes problems. But pinpointing a day is crystal ball stuff.
And the thing about China as well, if you think that there would be confrontation, every good that's manufactured there will stop on a dime. So how prepared are you for what's in the ships right now? And that's it for years or decades. Because you see after some of these, really aggressive conflicts that it takes decades, plural, to repair everything and bring it back online again, even to remotely where it was prior to that conflict. Supply chains, manufacturing, the facilities themselves, the ports are always damaged, rails are damaged, everything's damaged, power plants are damaged. So if something does go off, you can anticipate that there's nothing else coming from China. And that's really a sad thing, because all the eggs are literally in one basket over there for the world's manufacturing. I mean, how long would it take for us to bring all that back to the United States, retool, start heavy metal smelting, steel production, aluminum smelting, that sort of thing again, and then bring the economy back up where we have a manufacturing base? Even if we started with the Manhattan Project today, it would still take, 7-8 years to achieve that goal. But there's really nothing pushing from behind. We're not backed into a corner just yet. So, thinking about conflicts and inflation, that's one thing. Chinese are starving. They lost so much out of the fields last year, flooded their warehouses and storehouses. And with the new information and political statements and CCP mandates, buy energy at any cost, buy food and import it at any cost. And if you know through history, the potato famine in Ireland, when those people were starving on the side of the road, they had the army transporting food out for sale, export market wise, while the people starved in the country. Now, I think it's going to happen again. You got to be kidding me if you think that they're going to be nicer this time, when through history, you see that famines, there's still food grown, but it's exported, higher bidder. And then China comes out and says, we'll buy it at any price. Price. This should you should have like tingles down the back of your spine when you hear statements like this from the CCP.
Well, I mean, you look at this. I mean, go back to World War II, for example. The day World War II ended, Europe was in ruins. How many people were displaced? Okay. It wasn't like, oh, the war's over, poof, Monday morning, everybody goes back to work and things are back together. It takes forever to rebuild a country like that. Then you look at China. China's three biggest industries: manufacturing, okay, no power, the factories are down. Second one is industrial equipment, mining, whatever it would be. Gee, we have an aluminum shortage, we have a steel shortage, whatever it would be. They have a coal shortage, so they're not able to mine. Third biggest industry, real estate development in China. Between those three industries, which are all in a complete disaster right now, that's 75% of China's GDP. That's what China is hanging on by fingernails. I did a video on this the other day. You think of the U.S. economy. For about 50 years, between the 20s and the 70s, we were a strong manufacturing economy. We hit a peak. It got too expensive to manufacture here to create the goods. Everything moved over to China 50 years ago. China's now where the U.S. was in the 1970s. Now you're going to see all that manufacturing move to Vietnam, Cambodia, wherever it would be, where they can get the cheap labor again. And China's going to be in the same situation that we were in the 70s. Remember what we had in the way of inflation in the 70s when it was manufactured here. Now imagine the inflation goes on to China, and you, like you said, you can't get the stuff on the ships because there ain't any more coming. Okay. And we don't manufacture it here. So where are you going to get that pair of blue jeans, that new pair of tennis shoes, the towels you need, a blanket, whatever? If you don't have them, you ain't getting them.
Or you repair it like our grandparents did. And there's a tire shortage for farm equipment to even harvest this year. So the MRO parts, or the maintenance repair operations, and different repair parts for farm machinery is not coming either. So I don't know how many, there's at least 10, 12% at last count of all harvesting equipment laying idle because it's broken. It doesn't have tires, doesn't have whatever repair part that needs to be in there. Something's broken. And I saw, who was it? Cliff High. He was talking about transmissions for 18 wheelers and different parts of mechanical device in the engine, specifically drivetrains and transmission assemblies, not coming. So then we have another whole part of the supply chain affected where trucks are going to start sitting idle on the road because they don't have repair parts either. At what point do you start cannibalizing all the other junk that's laying around, literally like salvage yards, etc.? But will it fit into newer model vehicles? And can somebody have the skill, if it doesn't fit and it's maybe, you know, an inch too long, does somebody have the skill to then shrink that down and keep it with the same tensile strength so it fits into some of these newer engines? I'm going to say no. So what are we left with then if things just stop running and there's no way to repair them? Are we going to go back to pulling horses again to plow fields and harvest crops? I mean, what kind of yield declines are we looking at? Massive, massive yield declines. Plus the manufacturing of fertilizers is ongoing. This will be the newest thing coming into spring, is the fertilizer shortage. So without fertilizers, how's the crop yield going to decline bushels per acre as well? So look out a little bit further. They're already broadcasting that there's going to be fertilizer shortages coming in for this next year. So yield declines there. How much could really be planted with all the broken machinery? You know, you have to start subtracting digits off of this yield and available food tonnage, pure and simple.
And then you get into the fact of, you know, what is China short of more than anything else right now? Food. And what are they going to go after? Food. Well, gee, if all of a sudden the United States or, you know, Europe or wherever you got food, I mean, we all know China is buying up land in North Africa like crazy because they can grow food there. Well, if the Chinese, or pick a country, really doesn't matter, sees that, gee, the United States or Mexico or Canada or Venezuela or whatever has no way to defend themselves, and obviously China puts a lot of emphasis on their military. If they're still strong in that and we can't fix machinery, they can come right in and either take the land or buy it, or say, hey, we'll give you the parts, or we'll give you a tractor so you can work your fields, but we want half the food. That's what's going to end up happening. They can literally, I don't want to say threaten, but squeeze us to a point where we have to support them, because if the only manufacturing going on is going on over there and they've got control over all the parts like you talked about, they hold us hostage at that point.
And again, how quickly could something be retooled here in the States to produce parts for those machines? I mean, that you're talking about putting up an entire factory assembly line to knock out widgets, basically. But how many different widgets would you need? Thousands and thousands. And really, even bringing it back down to simple CNC lathes to try to even put some kind of molds together. I mean, we outsource all that. Even initial molds are all done in China too. So even just the very basic concept of bringing something so you could stamp it, that's not even done in the States anymore.
Right.
Injection molding for plastics, all that's done in China. We got nothing. We can't even make plastic bottles barely in the United States anymore. All that's over in China. So, I mean, even the basic, we're talking literally from starting over literally 1940 again, like you stated, after the war, bring it all home, set up whatever, and then start again. We're at that same precipice again. It seems like we're just spinning in circles. And these resets are planned on a certain time frame. They call it the fourth turning. There does seem to be validity on an 80-year cycle. 5 of those is a grand solar minimum, by the way. 80, 8 times 5, 400.
Yep.
So as you look back in history over not just 200 years, 500 years, but several thousand years, you can just look through history and see this ebb and flow on the 80-year cycle, the 400-year cycle, and the 2,000-year cycle, all based on external forces, but then it affects the human, and how does the human behave in that dire duress situation? And that's the spooky factor. Hungry people do strange things. And then how do you protect what you have when strange people are walking across your property saying, hey, they got light, they must have food?
Yep. Well, look at the grand solar minimum and empires. Empires collapse during the grand solar minimum. Your average empire lasts a little more than 200 years. Well, the United States, a little more than 200 years. It's about time for a change. You can't really say a grand solar minimum has affected the United States because 400 years ago, the United States didn't exist. But if you look at the empires in Europe, or the the Chinese, or the empires in Asia, they have a tendency to collapse during a grand solar minimum because of colder winters, hotter summers, lack of food, etc. Crazy weather patterns, things that's what we're in for. And a lot of people try to dismiss it as pseudoscience, but you can go back thousands of years and verify all that data.
Some anecdotal evidence here for the U.S. during a grand solar minimum. Where did Thanksgiving come from? They landed in the 1600s during the Maunder minimum and nearly starved because they couldn't get their crops to grow when they arrived here.
Right.
You think about the original boats floating over, early 1600s, and they nearly didn't make it. So then the whole glorified story of, hey, we'll share our, no, that was a starvation thing going on there. And also there's Mississippian cultures. And if you go back in, and when I say Mississippian, we're talking about the earth-built pyramids of the Native Americans here, collapsing right around 1200. I mean, they had vast societies up until 1200, a full-on collapse. They started to rebuild into around 1200, 1300 or so, and then they got knocked back again. And you can start to see it even here with the drought cycles and the rise and fall of Native American societies, civilizations over, depending on regionally where you're at in the US. And then the Mayans, 800 AD, they just suddenly disappeared. That's right, the same time the Tang Dynasty in China collapsed. So we got two different societies at apex. I mean, the Tang Dynasty, for those of you that don't know about China, was considered the apex of the apex of the apex of everything in the known world at that time. Knocked out at the knees, Mayans as well. So it's happening on 2 continents at that point where you can start to then connect dots around on these specific timelines. So we're here again. Now, how would governments react if they knew it's here? Okay, so it's just a certain amount of people have this information that we're back at this cycle again. This time you have 8 billion people. They're going to get angry. They're hungry. They will get hungry, and they're going to be fighting for food on the streets, and they're going to want change like every single time. So how would you control that so you and a person in power wouldn't be as threatened?